Good morning and welcome to Finanspanelen. The first Finanspanel after summer, although it's still summer, of course. Feels like school starting all over again, doesn't it, summer? My name is Per Wisén. I work at the Swedish House of Finance at the Stockholm School of Economics, and I will be moderating this morning's session. And this seminar is a co-production between SNS, Swedish House of Finance, and Mistra this morning. And we will talk about sustainable finance or green finance, a topic which, as you know, is very high on the agenda for business leaders, for employees, for politicians, for media, for everybody, and basically everybody is very positive towards not almost everybody, among politicians at least, is very positive to the concept of green finance. And in 31st of January, I think it was, 2018, a year and a half ago, a report was published called Financing a Sustainable European Economy. It was called a high-level expert group chaired by Christian Thimann, CEO and chairman of Athora, advisor to the EU-Commission, former director general and advisor to Mario Draghi at the ECB, member of the Council of Economic Advisors to the Prime Minister of France, and on and on and on. He is very involved in all things happening in Europe about these things. The Swedish representative or the Swedish member of this group was Magnus Billing from Alecta, who is here with us today as well. And we thought that sounded really interesting. We really wanted to do a seminar on this report, and we contacted Christian Thimann, and as you can imagine, he was extremely busy. Everybody wanted to hear about this report, and it was brand new, but we didn't give up. And today he's here with us this morning, and we are very happy to have him here. So the format of this will be that Christian Thimann will talk for 30 minutes, more on his personal, how he looks upon what is happening in this field, touching upon the report, I think, as well. And then we have invited 3 people from the audience to make a spontaneous comment on this from up here. And the first will be Karin Apelman, Secretary General and CEO of FAR, the Institute for the Accountancy Profession in Sweden, Magnus Billing, CEO of Alecta, and Mats Andersson with a long career in finance behind him, but here, partly at least because he was the author of a report on green bonds in Sweden. And they will do 5-minute comments on this. And then we rely, as always, on you. There is so much competence in the audience on these things, so the last 30 minutes or so, we will devote to a dialogue with you on these topics. So once again, very much welcome, Christian Thimann. Welcome to Stockholm and welcome to Finanspanelen.
So good morning. It's a real great pleasure to be here with you in Stockholm and talk about this topic, which has indeed kept so many people busy for the last 2 years. Thank you very much for the invitation, Per. It's wonderful. We are enjoying Stockholm as a Mediterranean city these days and are enjoying every minute of it. To speak about sustainability in this place with its all history, the ecological history is of course very special, and also for me personally, because I remember an anecdote with my father, who is one of the most risk-averse people on this planet. And once I asked him, by the way, if you were not born in Germany, which other country would you like to have been born into? And he said, maybe the US. That should be interesting. And I said, but if you don't know your position in society, whether you're rich or poor and so on, he said, sorry, Sweden. So this is why Sweden, apart from Kurt Tucholsky and Schloss Gripsholm and so on, has such a wonderful appeal. I have prepared a presentation in a new format, you will see, and it is a little bit inspired by a television show. So to make it a little bit more lively, so it is some issues we will go through. We will not have different weights on all the issues, but it just gives you a mapping of the topics we'll go through. And then I'm very interested, of course, to have your questions. Let me start with a little bit of personal background on my experience of unsustainability. I happened to be at the IMF during the Asian crisis in 97, 98 and witnessed for the first time a huge question of unsustainability in finance. You remember the Asian miracle, finance long-term issues by short-term credit, a huge collapse on a whole continent and a very dramatic outcome. The second is the US subprime crisis. At the time, I was working with Jean-Claude Trichet at the ECB, and we realized, of course, this dramatic development. And what I thought is interesting to be remembered, it was financial markets that first of all priced the assets in the wrong way. It ended up in the banks. The banks did buy them, yes. But also there was a lot of pressure. You remember the rating agencies, AAA rating, high returns, you could not resist. And I think we should remember that the markets got this really terribly wrong. The third, of course, kept us extremely busy was the euro area crisis. And again, the speculation by financial markets challenging the sustainability of the euro and challenging the sustainability of public finances in many countries. Again, I think it was a very deep experience that told us a lot about how financial markets are functioning and how sometimes they exercise a very negative and short-term pressure on countries in that case. After that, I moved to AXA and was lucky to arrive in Paris at the time of the COP21. You remember, after 20 years of not so successful COPs, the French managed to get the breakthrough. And we were sitting some months before at this AXA company and saying, what can be our contribution? How can we, as corporate citizens, contribute to this debate? What is our duty? And so we did, like most insurance companies, look at product development, better data, better understanding, modeling of climate-related risks, and so on. And then we ask ourselves, what do we do with the investment side? Shouldn't we do something on that side too? And we decided eventually, after long internal deliberations, to divest from coal. And it was the first time a global large insurance company showed that it acts on both sides of the balance sheet. So not just product development, not just the liability side, but also the asset side. So saying we don't think that this is a viable long-term investment for an insurance company that tries to protect against climate change, and therefore we need to act on that. We discussed with the supervisor, but they were blank on the subject, obviously. It was many years ago, 4 years ago, and we took that step nevertheless. It was a difficult decision because you do something that looks a bit out of the ordinary. And in the end, we were very lucky because the COP was a success. Everybody divested from coal. We got compliments from all over the world, from the Californian regulator even, and many other followed. So it was a good investment and a good corporate responsibility decision. But the interesting thing is we didn't want to send just a negative message. So we also said we would like to invest more in green assets. And we found out that selling coal is easy, technically easy. Buying green is difficult because there is not a lot. So we are still out, and they are still out now looking for green assets, and we find there's not a lot out there. And it's still the question, how do you invest? If you want to invest in the green economy, what do you invest into? And that's still an important question that is hanging out. And then I got a call from the European Commission, from Olivier Garçon and Valdis Dombrovskis, who asked me whether I could chair a group. Because the Commission had the following observation. They said so many things are happening. We see the COP21, we hear of the financial FSB, TCFD, we hear of greening the economy, and we don't know how to integrate this into our body of legislation. And we would like to get external advice because we don't feel sufficiently competent on this. And they created this expert group. We started at 20, we ended up 60. It was a huge endeavor at the European Commission. And the member from Sweden on this picture, you see him very small, but very eminent, was Magnus, and very much appreciated by the whole group. And I'm personally thankful to you, Magnus, for all your contributions you have done in this group. The group worked very hard. It was told to be the hardest working expert group in the history of the Commission. And I told everybody, your life is made of few crystallizing moments. This is one. We are here, the right people at the right time, on the right subject. We have to work very hard. And so everybody did, and we produced the report. And this report then led to this whole concept that the Commission is working on, which we'll go through now. So what is sustainability? We're now at sustainability 20. I think it's very important to say that in a way, it is something very fundamental and not even new. We have been discussing sustainability since the Club of Rome. So, and we should keep in mind, it is really about the preservation of our economic prosperity and of our social fabric as well. And my first message is that we have to think about sustainability always in the triangle. Yes, it is about the environment, but it's also about the economy, and it is also about our social structure. And if you like to see an example how things can go wrong if you forget two aspects of the triangle, it is very interesting to look at the German energy transition. Because Germany tried at some point to reorient its energy production towards climate. They said, we have to do that, it's very important. So what they did is they imposed 125 billion on subsidies on the electricity consumers to subsidize renewable energy. They built 27,000 windmills in the country, 1.5 million solar plants. The good thing, 30% of electricity in Germany is now from renewables. The bad thing, they have to expand the German language. You all may know a little bit of German, I don't know, kindergarten or so. There are two new words to be used in the German language. The first is called when it's dark, which is dunkel, and there's no wind, which is Flaute. So the Germans are discovering that during Dunkelflaute, there's no electricity. And the sun is not always shining in Germany. And the second word you need to learn is Flatterstrom. So this is volatile electricity. Whereas earlier with nuclear and coal, electricity provision was stable, now it's extremely volatile. The third thing that happened is electricity prices doubled. You guys in Sweden pay 19 to 22 cents the kilowatt hour. In France, they pay 16. In Germany, they pay 32. And the CO2 emissions of Germany have not fallen in 7 years. So you have a situation where you somehow didn't achieve the goals, where because you exited nuclear, of course, also at the same time, which complicates, so they had to put up more coal, more gas. You put the economy a bit at risk because you have no longer stable electricity production, and you impose very high social costs. So this is an example why it's so important to always look at this triangle and remember to do the three things at the same time. My next point is to say that sustainability is axiomatically linked to the long term. We can't, and it doesn't make sense, to think about sustainability in the short term. Sustainability, by definition, is what lasts. So we do have to think in the long-term perspective. And when we think and ask ourselves what is relevant in terms of long-term investment, we find that many things are relevant for society. And you can look over a span of years. Of course, our society is related to jobs, to education, to environment, to infrastructure, and of course, climate. And the interesting thing about the climate is, it is the longest one out. There's no other area where we look 100 years ahead and try to develop policy proposals from then. That's about climate. So the idea is if we manage to integrate these long-term considerations in our financial system, we'll also manage all the rest that are a bit shorter term. And there's something else about finance, which we discussed a lot in the group and on which we got a lot of feedback when we discussed with CEOs. And this is the tension between the short term and the long term. And there was once, so many CEOs would like to invest more in the long term, into infrastructure, into jobs, into technological change. But they say, I feel a lot of pressure from short-term finance to not give up short-term earnings. And this is a big tension. And one CEO told the following story, I think in a very illustrative way, and he has been on this for many years. He said, my problem is that I have two speeches in my suit. Here, I have the speech for the financial analysts, the community that visits me every quarter, and they would like to know about cash flow, return on equity, return on capital, dividend payout ratio, and dividend next year. That is what the analysts ask me for. And that's my speech for them. But then I have in this side of my suit a second speech, which is the speech I give when I see the employees, when I go to see politicians, and when I travel to Davos. And this speech is about our business model, our technology, our contribution to society, the youth, the planet, and the climate. And he says, I'm getting crazy that these two speeches are disconnected and that I don't know how to run my company. I would love to run my company the right way, the long-term way, but the financial analysts challenge me all the time, comparison, benchmarks, and so on the short-term earnings. And we have discussed this with many CEOs, and their view is always that this is a fundamental challenge. So the message is, if we want to shift the financial sector to do more long-term thinking, we have to protect our corporations against undue short-term pressure. Undue means to abuse long-term instruments to extract very, very short-term gains. It's not against treasury management, liquidity management, it's against undue short-termism, which is really the issue. Now, what is sustainable finance? And it's such a broad subject that I think it's good to have a simple way to think what is in that subject. And you can think about sustainable finance as having two arms, really, and everything fits under those. One arm is about the broader risk awareness, management, and control. So ESG and climate means to look broader than just to financial results. You look at climate, you look at environment, you look at social issues. So it's the whole broadening of the risk awareness. And this is one important arm, and we will see many, many implications from that. This is to better understand. It's the cognitive part, so to say. And the other arm, if you like, is the action. Because it's not enough that we just realize that we are on the wrong trajectory. We have to do something against that. And we have to invest more. We have to invest more in technological change, in batteries, in infrastructure, electric vehicles, in renewable energy, and so on and so forth. So we have to mobilize long-term investment. And these are, in a way, the two arms of sustainable finance. So if somebody asks you, what is sustainable finance? I will say, well, it's two things: broadening the risk, not just financial, but also ecological, climate, and so on. And second, action, to do more. And this is indeed what the Commission asked for. So the main measures, what happened in documents you see are these abbreviations. So we have the high-level expert group, we have the task force on financial-related disclosures, climate-related financial disclosures, and we have the central bank network on greening the financial system. If you like to read one document, I think the expert group report reads itself very well. But of course, the main action political document is the European Commission Action Plan of May 2018. This is the document that condenses the high-level expert group and the other work, and that tries to give the action plan on how to integrate all of this into financial regulation. And we will now look through what is in that. First, we will see that it is a long list. So first on risk awareness and control. And we have first to realize that it is complex. Our financial system is complex. Our regulation, if you work in the private sector, is complex, both for banks and for insurance and for UCITS and for MiFID and so on. These are complex legal documents. And therefore, there is no single magic switch. First, we thought, isn't there one thing you could do to change the system from unsustainability towards sustainability? And we realized there's not. So one has to work through each and every piece of regulation. And this is what the group did. So we looked at banks, asset managers, insurance companies, pension funds. We looked at financial products. We looked at ratings. We looked at supervisory responsibilities. And for each and every piece, we had to identify what is the issue. Is there scope for change towards sustainability? And now that's why you have a long list, and now it gets difficult to summarize because we have to work specifically. But the main points, I would say, what the Commission is looking for are the following. First, governance. The idea is that every company and every bank and every insurance company should have a governance structure that is informed about the issue of climate change and climate-related risks. And you should document this, and your supervisory board should discuss this at least once a year, so to say. So you must show that your governance structure is up for that. The second is disclosures. So the Commission is pushing and has already developed guidelines to show how you can integrate climate-related financial reporting into your financial reporting. And this is something indeed very important because everybody believes that by reporting, you provide greater transparency to the outside world and also change the dynamics within the company. And I must say, I've experienced this myself. The moment you have to write in your financial report about climate-related change, there's a lot of discussion internally. And the CEO and the supervisory board, because they have to sign off of the report, all discuss this very, very thoroughly. So the disclosure element is very important. Ratings is the next one. The Commission would like that rating agencies, when they do long-term rating of companies, do look at their climate-related risks and climate-related opportunities. So that's something new. The rating agencies at the moment were hesitating because now we have our financial models, but they got convinced with a little nudge that this is the time of the year and they have just to do that topic. ESG integration for benchmarks and analysts. So there's a number of places where we have to integrate ESG. The financial benchmark, the stock market benchmarks, of course, are based on market capitalization. And this is a measure of the past, if you like. It's on current investment, current valuation. We need to be forward-looking. And we need, therefore, to think how we can adjust the main stock market and corporate bond market benchmarks to integrate sustainability. So this is something the Commission asked the index providers to do. Financial product labels. Big discussion about the real retail sector and said many people have ESG preferences. We all feel strongly about this issue and therefore we should be able to understand whether the financial products we want to buy also integrate that or not. So very important, if you are selling financial products, you have to check whether the ultimate investor is and to which degree interested in these issues and then adjust the products accordingly. Broadening fiduciary duty, too. It's not just to safeguard the financial interests, but also the broader ESG interests. The green bond standard. The European Commission is planning to harmonize and develop a European green bond standard. It is a small but very fast-growing segment. Many sovereigns are getting along to consider issuances. You know of France, you know of Poland. Sweden is thinking about that. So the idea is to develop some standards that avoid greenwashing and make sure that this is clearly additive. It's not just relabeling, but is actually helping to provide new capital for new initiatives. Supervisory duties, the Commission did not spare their own supervisors, the ESAs, from also looking into this and developed now guidance that they are strengthening competencies on that and also enter that into the supervisory dialogue. So if you're a bank now, when you see the supervisor, there's a high likelihood that climate issues, climate change will be discussed. And a few years down from the road, the likelihood of that is 1. So all the supervisory communities are getting up to speed to get competent on this issue and develop procedures in this regard. The capital framework is in square brackets because it was very contentious. Should you tinker with the capital framework in order to foster green lending? Should you allow banks to hold less capital against green assets? Should you allow insurance companies to hold less assets, less capital against green assets? And there were different views within the group. I would say the majority said, no, let's not do that. Capital is there to cover financial risks. We would not see this as the main tool to develop a green lending stream or green investment stream. But people in the Commission sometimes think it could be a very nice political message. So this is a difficult issue. You see, the list is quite long on the risk awareness and control, but if we have done all of this, we have not yet done the real change. So how can we foster more long-term orientation and investment? And the first keyword is a strange one. It's the famous taxonomy. So taxonomy is a classification system that in the Commission was developed by our cousin, a younger group, a technical expert group that worked for a year, and in June presented the blueprint of a taxonomy. And what is that? It is a classification scheme by sector: agriculture, fishery, iron, mining, heavy industry, light industry, cement, transportation, and that in each tries to identify what would be areas of significant contribution to climate mitigation, climate adaptation, environmental protection, social protection, or other desirable features. And you can imagine it's very comprehensive. The internal report has 460 pages because what they are trying to do is to map our economy towards desirable goals. And they're very careful to say that taxonomy is not reinventing social planning. So it's not to say that we now have the master plan, but it is there as to give an indication of what from today's perspective would seem desirable. And what could be ambitions for the cement industry, for example, to produce with lower CO2, what would be beneficial for the housing industry, insulation, and so on and so forth. And you will have a lot of discussions about that because it is, of course, a moving target. New technology will come, and therefore it has to be adapted. It will probably not be the basis for hard and fast policies. It's more there to inspire and guide. But it is a very, I would say, very laudable attempt and a very important piece of work that is just out for you to consult. Infrastructure advisory, there was the idea that Europe needs to develop much more infrastructure. Countries are not always in sync to develop that, so the Commission is thinking to strengthen advisory capacity. We come to a very difficult issue, which is accounting. You would say, what on earth does accounting have to do with sustainability? And yet it does, because it is also the question how we can foster more long-term thinking. And there's a big discussion about IFRS, marking to market, whether this is creating short-termism, because this puts volatility into balance sheet of long-term investors. You know that in the banks, you have a banking book which is not marked to market and the trading book. For the insurance sector, the entire balance sheet is marked to market. And this has important implications. For example, the insurance are no longer counter-cyclical, they're now pro-cyclical. It's very difficult to hold on to investments if the market turns. You probably have to sell. And this is a big debate how we can attenuate short-termism by possibly changing some of the accounting rules. The idea is not to pour out the baby with the bathing water, but to do some intelligent adjustments. And the same is on fighting short-termism. The Commission is investigating to help the CEO with the 2 speeches to get them connected somewhat more. So there's a long list of issues. Progress is underway. Already on disclosure, it is done. On ratings, it's approved. On the benchmarks, it's in the process. Financial product labels as well. And the new Commission will certainly continue this piece of work. There's an enormous momentum, as I'm sure you have felt, in Brussels, in the Parliament, in the Commission, that Europe stays in the vanguard of this, and this is really implemented into the financial system. Now the question, what are the achievements? So how would we assess that? And I would say the first achievement is the picture from the $1 note, the I, is cognizance. We have discussing this issue for 30 years, but I think now there is a quantum leap in cognizance of the importance of that topic. The Club of Rome was a great initiative. The first 20 clubs didn't have a lot of teeth. This one has teeth. So we now have the awareness that things need to change. We need to change the way we produce and consume goods in the global economy if really we want to move towards more sustainability and fight climate change, which we feel a reality in many parts of the world already. So this is a very big achievement. The second big achievement is that something happened in this area which nobody, I believe at least, thought would happen, namely this. And we are back to Sweden, that we mobilized the young generation. I mean, it is very rare that the young generation has been, I would say, so forward-looking, say, we want to take an issue, we want to raise our voice on the topic, and that they are mobilizing themselves on something we would think is far in the future, is very abstract and so on. And this is a very, very big achievement in my view. And the third big achievement is that material change is happening across sectors. I know of no insurance company that is not investing into climate change and other sustainability issues. They all are investing more into modeling, buying data, buying better satellite data, developing products, reviewing their investment portfolios, say, what investment should we keep, should we not keep, how can we engage more with companies, and so on. And the same is in asset management, in pension funds, in banking. So there's real change happening. There's also real change happening in the corporate sector to shift investments towards these areas. You see it in the transportation sector, you see it in the energy sector, and you will see it in many, many other sectors. Agriculture is one, where people realize that the way we produce food is totally unsustainable, also from a natural endowment perspective, and that we need to change that as well. So I think these are very, very important achievements. But like always, they're not only achievement, they're also risks. And I would like to be very transparent and share my own impression of some of these risks. The one is a little bit over-planning, that we think from today's perspective to know what the technology will be in 30 years. When we talk about climate, we say 2030, 2050, this is 30 years ahead. If we think 30 years back, none of the technology that today is daily technology was around. So there's a question, I think we need to be mindful, not, as I said earlier, to reinvent socialist planning. That was not the biggest economic success after all. So that we need to keep our minds technologically open. We can say from today's perspective, we believe electric vehicles, but maybe synthetic fuels will come around and we will understand that driving with a 600 kilo battery under your seat is not the most intelligent and environmentally friendly way to move. So that's the first thing. The second risk I do see is a bit over-determination. And this I see when we talk to our supervisor, and they would now like to do stress tests. First of all, you say there's risks, let's do a stress test. At AXA, the balance sheet had 2 million lines. We looked at this up and down and up and so on, and we tried to identify degrees of portfolio and so on. And you can see the complexity. Because you invest in maybe coal is easy to identify, but many other companies are diversifying within. You have utilities company that was some years ago based on coal and gas and now is based on solar. So there's no reason to divest. On the contrary, you should stay engaged to help that company. So in my view, it's very difficult really to come up with some crude measures that would fit the story. And therefore, my sense is we have to be careful not to be over-deterministic to say we know now how to measure sustainability on an asset-by-asset portfolio or a lending-by-lending portfolio. That really every asset is different and it's not easy to determine that. The second is over-regulation. I read, of course, the speech by Valdis Dombrovskis, who was very pleased to announce that they had prepared a whole new package of financial regulation. Which is true. They have, and they have been very productive, and we all feel proud for a moment. And the second moment is when your teams have to work through this legislation, you understand maybe it would be even better to change some of the existing regulation rather than put something on top. And this is something, again, we have to be careful in Europe. We are very good at writing more rules and yet more rules and even further rules. But the real challenge is how to adjust. And what do we need to change in different sectors? Suffocation is a little bit another issue. We live in an internationally competitive global economy. There is the statistics apparently that 1 unit of export from China produces 10 times as much CO2 than 1 unit of export from Europe. Why? Because the production technologies are different and you have the transport. So it would be a mistake to suffocate the European economy, which would then just lead to more imports from far away, which may be produced in a less environmentally friendly way and through transportation has negative climate impacts. So we have to be careful not to suffocate our economy. And then barking up the wrong tree, if you work in a bank and an insurance company, you always have the impression everybody looks at you because you have an address, you're transparent, you're registered, you have the governance structure, you have the supervisor and so on. And we have to be careful that this is only one part of the financial sector and there's a whole shadow financial sector, which is the hedge funds, which is the fast money and so on, and nobody's really looking at them. And if we want to change the financial system towards sustainability, we have to change the whole financial system. We will not get there by just say, oh, we pick the few banks of which we know the address and really, really work hard on them, and forget about the whole fast money, shadow money sector that is very important and that I mentioned a little bit here at the outset in the first 3 pictures that played a very detrimental role on sustainability. So this is where we stand, but there's still one column to come, and this is the question, what are the open issues? And I would like to say, just to provoke a bit the discussion and the thought, that my view is that even if we do all of this, from governance to fighting short-termism and accounting and so on, it will probably not be enough. We still lose the battle. So even if we do out of this regulatory change, we will not. And why? And I have three provoking thoughts for this early morning here. The first is that I believe that the number one climate killer is globalization. Globalization as we know it, the endless chain of production, the enormous transportation of unfinished goods, raw material and finished goods. And if you see the stories where products are coming from, the amount they have traveled, you think from some apples that have traveled from finished good, semi-finished good and so on. If you see that global shipping emits huge amounts of CO2 and of sulfur and so on, much more than the transportation traffic, even though it's invisible to us, it's not invisible to the planet. So for the moment, I believe we're very much focusing, at least where I live, on the diesel engine in the cities. That's only a very small part of the story. The whole global shipping, the globalization of production is a big challenge. And my way would be to rethink a little bit what is global, what is local, what's national, what's regional. We cannot undo globalization, and we don't want to undo globalization, but maybe we can organize some of the production in a more sustainable way. And maybe this will even help some of the regions. If I look at France, which has been totally industrialized through globalization and has very tough time in its regions because there's no more employment there, they would be happy to redo some of the goods and produce some of the things again. And this would be good for the economy, for the society, and also for the planet. I believe that also we need to look at our own profession. We are in the economics faculty here, and I think there is something also to be rethought in economics. And I would say the number one wrong formula in economics, and I say that with a smile, is the formula that social welfare is the sum of aggregate consumption. You get this taught in microeconomics that the household is a consumption utility maximizer, which is maximizing consumption. Consume more and more and more for cheaper and cheaper goods. That's the more welfare you have. If you listen to families, I have not heard one single family where the father has said, this year we consume 2% more than last year. We are much better off. And next year, 3% more. That's our aim. So we discuss very different things in families. We discuss employment, we discuss education, we discuss nature, we discuss prospects, jobs and so on. We don't discuss consumption. And I believe that this thinking of us being consumers, maximizing consumption, shopping lower prices and so on, is very devastating and is the wrong approach. And is not helping us, but also hindering us. And lastly, I think in finance, there is the number one wrong paradigm, somehow that financial markets have supremacy over financial institutions. That we say the market is always right. It's the market. How can you contest the market? Subprime, AAA. I had banks in my office who were in tears that they say we were pushed by the market to buy these assets. We didn't want to, because we didn't have a good feeling about them. But the market told us that's the right price, so we had to go for it. And when the losses came, the market was gone, and we were sitting there with the Ministry of Finance. So this idea that the market is right and that they price assets efficiently and that we have all to take the same price and that we more trade, the better it is, I believe we have to be very careful. And again, if you look at this slide, here the first three blocks, it has largely been the financial market that priced assets wrong. So I believe we have to be very careful in our thinking on that. So therefore, my concluding box, and we are now at Open Issues 100, you have made it, is that the litmus tests for the European Union, apart from this, will be really to change paradigms regarding financial markets. To second, change paradigms regarding globalization and trade. Yes, the EU is pleased to open another free trade agreement and allow Donald Trump to ship 50,000 tons of American beef to Europe. But is that really what we think is the sustainable way of food consumption in Europe? We have procurement rules that say you have to buy the cheapest, and which is often then a global input, and you see stones coming from India and so on rather than local production. So there's a lot to do, again, thinking globalization and trade arrangements. And after the three little dots, you see something where we spend half of our money on in Europe. And if you look deeper into this issue of agriculture, you see there is a big opportunity for Europe to also introduce much more sustainability in an area that it manages itself. So this is, we have now done the whole show, the template of the sustainability topic. You see it's very broad, it's very colorful, I think it's very enticing, and I'm overall, I think, very, very pleased, because if you go through these crises, subprime, US, Euro, Asia, there's a hope that we would orient the financial system towards sustainability for the good of our economy and for the good of the financial system itself. And I'm most hopeful, if we are too old, Achievements 40 is showing that the next generation is there to lead the baton and carry that forward. And that's why I am very optimistic and will close on this note. Thank you very much.
It's great to be here today and to discuss this very important subject. I think thanks very much for an excellent presentation, really setting the framework on the importance of what is sustainability and how complex it is, how broad it is, and also coming into the details and also mentioning the accountants that I represent. Thanks, especially for that. I was at a conference last year asking, can accountants save the world? And we all agreed. I think we were accountants in the room. I'm Karin Apelman, and my background is also working with export credit agencies. I was the Director General for EKN for 9 years, the Swedish Export Credit Agency. At EKN, that I don't represent today, but anyway, we had transactions in 147 countries. Really spoke about sustainability and started with CSR, corporate social responsibility was the term that was used. We spoke about the environmental impact, the human rights impact, anti-corruption, and sustainable lending in all transactions globally. In the globalization, I don't get the slide coming up, but that's the latter part of this. And now I represent the Swedish Corporate Governance Board. I'm a member, and we have also, of course, sustainability in the code. It's a responsibility for the board of directors, we say, in the code. We work with the strategic matters in the code. We don't go into the operational issues because we think that is for really the companies to work with that. We don't want to micromanage, but we of course follow how this is being done. We have had a lot of dialogues with a lot of people of you that are in the room today on sustainability regarding the code, and we don't intend to change the code today because it's already there at the highest level, and we follow it closely that these issues are really taken care of. My other role that I have, I'm the Secretary General of the institution for the Swedish accountancy profession and also the CEO. And when I started a year ago, I said as one of my priorities, sustainability, of course. And I got myself engaged in a sustainable finance group or committee at Accountancy Europe, which is a member organization for members within accountancy institutions in Europe. And we are looking at this matter. We had a meeting starting up with the Sustainable Finance Committee asking, is it auditing or is it accounting? And of course it's both. It is auditing and accounting, and we have to make sure we're really doing it in a responsible manner so that we focus on the right thing. Nobody wants too much of regulation, and therefore we come to how do we see on this TCFD that we should be working with that. It's a good initiative. I understand 30 companies in Sweden are following it or supporting it today, mainly insurance companies and banks. And we are discussing this also with our member bodies. It's about how to integrate sustainability in the processes, in the decision making, in the overall governance of companies. And we are discussing also, should this be in the annual report or is it in a separate report? And how should we deal with this? Our member firms are advising on this, also from the opportunities side. We should also talk about opportunities when we talk about sustainability, of course. That was also done, but that needs to be also emphasized. There are a lot of opportunities working with sustainability and of course the risks as well, and these two needs to be balanced. So that's what our members do, talk to the clients about the investment process, the decision process, return on investment, making sure that sustainability is really on the agenda every day. it's not just one group working with sustainability. It should be everyone in a company that has it on its mind. And we're in the process. In terms of TCFD, it's a bit of an early days, but we will continue to work on it, and we will take our responsibility from the Swedish accountancy profession. Then I have a question, and you mentioned it briefly. It was how this TCFD then interacts with other initiatives. There is GRI, there is the SDG, there is the integrated reporting, and how do we really make it work together to continue to make a difference? That's my question. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Christian, for a very interesting presentation, and thank you for coming to Stockholm. It's fantastic to have you here. I would like to personally thank you as well for your engagement into this extremely important topic and your leadership in this area. I think the momentum that we see in Europe today is very much thanks to you, Christian. So it was a privilege to be part of your group, and this is a fantastic chairman to lead any expert group. I can highly recommend Christian for future chairmanship. You mentioned a little bit about stress testing, and I represent Alecta pension fund, and we have, as many other pension funds and insurance companies in Europe, started to stress test our portfolio. And as you alluded to, there's many challenges to that. And I think one of the challenges is, of course, the quality of data. This is a shift in the market from looking at historical data into more forward-looking data, scenario-based. And I think the quality of the data, at least if you look on the scope 1, it's acceptable. Scope 2 could be okay, but scope 3, it's well, to put it bluntly, it's terrible. It's barely useful. Now, if you look at the list of activities here or initiatives, I question a little bit what can be the catalyst or what can be the silver bullet for the quality improvement in data and the forward-looking. You have the TCFD part. You also have, I think, taxonomy as an instrument to improve the quality of the data. And it would be very interesting, I think, to hear your views on, if you look at the initiatives here, what will take us to the next step when it comes to quality of data. Second question I'd like to raise or to discuss is a little bit of short-termism and the long-termism. I think we all agree that in order to capture the externalities, internalize them, we need to be a little bit more long-term, look at the long-term a little bit more, both on the risk side but also on the opportunity side. And in some areas, we see that happening already today. And I think the stress testing in a portfolio is a great way to actually capture long-term risk in another way. However, I think, isn't it a risk, you talk about the pyramid of 3 components to consider in this endeavor, that we sort of treat short-termism that we're not embracing it as a value created for the financial market. I mean, long-term capital also needs short-term capital. Where's the balance point between short-termism and long-termism? That would be very interesting to hear your views on and thinking around. I know one of the favorite topics that you raise is high-frequency trading. Now, you didn't mention it today, but I've heard you mention it several times. So your views and thinking around that would be extremely interesting, I think. Again, thank you very much, Christian, for an extremely interesting presentation. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Mats Andersson. I have background in the financial sector for many years. I was 10 years at AP4. I have also been chair of an inquiry trying to figure out ways to promote the green bond market in Sweden. And today I'm the vice chairman of Global Challenges Foundation. My belief is that sustainability is not about charity, it's not about looking good, it's about mitigating risk. And if you do that in a proper way, you will actually lower your risk, and long term you will actually enhance your returns. There are numerous examples of that. I think the big challenge we have today is, and I've had for many years, is how do we connect the dots between the pile of money at pension funds, at asset managers, to finance the transition needed to actually make this planet a place where you can live, to put it bluntly. And we know that today, I think more than $10 trillion of bonds are actually yielding nothing or negative. And still, we don't make it to make the money actually being reallocated to more sustainable investments. So what can be done? Number one, I would say that you need to make investors become owners. As an investor, you come and you go. As an owner, you engage. I think we need to make pension funds like Alecta, I know you're doing a great job on that, to actually take responsibility who is on the board. And we need to make sure that actually the board has got the right mandate to act on every item, including sustainability, and that you will get reporting back on those topics. So again, make them owners, not investors. Secondly, I think we need to put the price on externalities, including CO2. I think that if you have the proper price on carbon emission, you will actually have capital reallocated to more sustainable investments purely on an economical basis. Thirdly, we need to find a way to scale up whatever products we have or ideas we have. We know that the green bond market is a huge success, but still after 10 years, it's about 1% of the global bond market. So we need to find, again, ways to scale this up to make it happen. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. That was a handful of questions to begin with, maybe.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank all three of you. I'll start with the TCFD, Karin. The TCFD started by saying we have to harmonize, we have to find a common language. We looked at the OECD countries and we found up to 300 different ways how this issue of climate-related risk could be addressed. And so the TCFD went out to say, can we not simplify that framework? And we developed 4, I believe, simple questions we thought could be the ones that companies report on. First, what's your governance on climate-related risk? How do you inform yourself about it? How do you discuss it? And so on. Second, how does it impact your strategy, your corporate strategy? How do you take that into account? Third, how do you manage the risks related to that, potentially? And fourth, what are the metrics that you use? Do you have metrics that you use, CO2 reduction, emissions reduction, energy efficiency, and so on and so forth? And this is the simple way. Almost 500 companies adopted that. And we see that it is being put into action. I know many companies who integrate that. The questions are how much detail you go for. And that becomes difficult. But the framework already is a very good basis to do so. And the Commission, in one of the disclosure sets, has tried to give guidance, adapt its guidance to that. So the TCFD fits in there. It says we would like companies to report on that. And the main idea is to mainstream it from a niche issue, sustainability report, CEO speeches, towards the financial report. And that's the change we see, and that's the change we observe in companies. Magnus, your questions on stress testing and data. Maybe I think we agree. When I'm a bit hesitant, I have, of course, the stress test by the supervisor in mind, because the supervisor doesn't end up with a gentle discussion. The supervisor can up with capital requirements, for example. And I think there is the question whether for this we have the right metric already. So I'm not against the idea that we stress test ourselves, that we do simulations and scenarios. The question is, are we ripe to do really supervisory stress tests with capital requirements as we would do it on others? And that's, I think, where I hesitate. On the data, it'll be like the turtle and the rabbit. We'll always run behind because data are backward-looking by definition, but our development is forward-looking. But I think the taxonomy indeed will help a lot because it is trying to develop for key sectors what could be data of sustainability. Again, a lot about CO2 emissions, about energy, efficiency investment, and so on. I think that will help. On high-frequency trading, I pinched myself not to mention that because otherwise people say I have an obsession with this. But then I read the Nobel Prize winners report by Alvin Roth Alvin Roth, who wrote about markets. And he says a market is only a market if you have people have a similar treatment of the assets they are trading. So if you have the same investors where equities means that something to them, and I must say, if I think of the high frequency trading, this is algorithm trading that trades bonds at the microsecond. That's 1/1,000,000th of a second, exchanges these bonds, and they say that a good chess player, a professional chess player, when he looks at an end game, takes 70 milliseconds or 700 milliseconds to assess whether he's checkmate or not. That's quite fast, 0.7 seconds, because I'm checkmate or not. And that in this period, a high-frequency trader has done 3,500 transactions. So the more I think about this, I can't get it out of my head that this cannot be the right way to treat our corporations. Where thousands of people are working, where families are dependent on, it cannot be the right thing that we allow 3,500 transactions in a split of a second, and that people derive private wealth from that with no social value. And in my view, and I talked a lot with the regulators, the Bundesbank has done great studies, they think it's not even providing good liquidity, because it's not robust, it's not there over cycles. You think it's liquid, but it's the first to vanish. So when you need them, the guys are not there. And for the rest, they're front-running your trades. And this is why I hesitate. But I understand they're invisible, and it's very difficult to argue against people who are invisible. But I do think it's not the right way to set up our market. On the investor owner, Mats, I think it's a great point, because the idea is, if I understand you correctly, to say, if you hold a stock, you should not just look at the dividend stream that comes in. You should engage. And you should engage with a company. And that is, again, which short-termist people don't do. Because in the split second, you don't have time to call the company. You have traded the stock so many times. So I think this is really the cultural change that we need, and that we need throughout the system. And it should not be that many people hold long-term equity for what it is, a voice in the company, a say in the company, and we have other people who can just trade it for short-term profits. And I think it's a very, very elegant way to phrase it.
Thank you. Now we are dying to hear you in the audience, all of you. Raise your hand. There will be a microphone coming up, and give us your name. Over here, and then Mia. Sir, microphone. There. Thank you.
Thank you. Frederick is my name, coming from Swedbank. One question about the EU Green Bond Standard and the, so to say, the future of it.
Yeah.
Seeing now that the EU Green Bond Standard, based upon the taxonomy, might be, fairly sharp. And the green issuance that we have in the market today might not live up to that. Will we see a market where we have two parallel standards living, or will there be a fall into the more strict one?
It's a great question. I think you're saying it's sharp because there's a lot of debate about additivity. People wanted to avoid greenwashing or green labeling. So there was a lot of focus to say when you buy a green bond, there should be additional investment. And this is where the debate is. And the Commission wanted not to be accused of just greenwashing and then say, oh, the green bond is growing, but in a way it's just relabeling. And that's where we see the crux. I would not be surprised if for some time being we will see two standards in parallel, but that it would converge, because I think there is an understanding we need to invest much more. We need to raise more volumes. The Commission believes that Europe needs to invest 170 billion more in insulation, energy, food system, and so on. The OECD speaks of 6 billion. These are, of course, huge numbers, but the message is clear. We need to have, at some point, additional investment, and therefore the idea that that could become an instrument of additional investment.
Thank you. I've seen two hands in the air. Mia was first. Mia Horn.
Yes, Mia Horn-Avrantzian, CEO here at SNS. Thank you very much for a very interesting overview and also a description of what's going on. I have a question. You said that this has teeth, the initiative, and just as a reflection, in the late 90s, I was based in Geneva, and then there was pressure to get environment and labor standards into the WTO negotiation, which were actually active at the time as compared to today. And the reason was that that could actually give teeth, because you have sanction systems in the WTO, which we all see happening today as an example. So I was wondering, in what way well, at the end, it didn't get into that because people felt it could be used for protectionism. So it ended up with being a voluntary initiatives. We have seen them for many years, and based on name and shame. And I was wondering, in what way does this have teeth? What sanctions are there if this is what one really wants?
Yeah. I would say the interesting thing, and that really changed, is the whole climate issue for 20 years has not touched upon finance. Right? The whole climate issue, when it started, was something of scientists. Then it became something for the ecological movements. Then it became something for heavy industry. And it's only the COP21 that the financial sector was mentioned. That's the innovation. For 20 years, if you read the COP conclusions, the financial sector is not mentioned. And the COP21 Article 2 says, if we want to achieve the 1.5 degrees, or 2, we need to reorient capital flows in the financial system. And it's very rare that foreign ministers would discuss financial flows and financial system. But the idea is exactly, if we put it there, we have a chance to give it teeth, because the financial system is much more closely supervised and regulated. And it is the central point where our investment decisions are being done. And this is the breakthrough of Paris in a way. And this is why we are all here, because this Article 2 led then to many things. So it has teeth because the financial sector is regulated and supervised, and therefore it is quite easy. I mean, the government intervenes. The government tells us government bonds have zero capital weight, right? That's a judgment call. You may not put all capital behind all euro area government bonds. So they are used to interfere and direct the financial system, and they use this opportunity now. So you have it has teeth because it enters regulation. Rating agencies have it in the regulation, benchmark providers will have it in the regulation. And this is being followed up by ESMA, for example, that when they see the rating agents say, so tell us, how do you include ESG? And you cannot say, we are not telling you, or we don't do that. So that is why we are using here government tools really of regulatory and supervisory power.
Okay, I have two more questions, and I'm waiting for somebody to challenge the provocations up there. It's globalization, the climate killer. Is GDP the wrong welfare measure? And are we overestimating the importance of markets? But please.
Maybe I'll challenge the third one.
Okay.
Henrik Hermansson, Swedish Agency for Growth Policy Analysis. And you're talking a lot about risks here, right? And for the financial market, the role in risk is relatively straightforward, balance risk and reward. Yeah. For governments, it's not as easy. For example, bailouts create moral hazard, which would be very problematic in the climate sense. For example, in making sure homeowners are insured even though their houses will be underwater, makes them stay there rather than move, etc. So it could be lots of problems here with sort of just minimizing risk from a government perspective. Also, for example, raising the CO2 price, that introduces a transition risk on companies, right? Yeah. So what is the proper role of governments in handling the different types of risks raised by the TCFD? Because it's not just minimizing them.
No, I would say for the government, it's really important to look at this triangle. And if you look at different countries in Europe, let's say France, for example, France has, of course, 85% nuclear electricity, very few coal. So they're doing great on the CO2. But the question is, how do they have a social, sustainable system? And the Yellow Vest protest in the regions tells you there's also something that the population feels that they are not on a sustainable path. So I'd say for the government, it's really very important to start to balance these things. And indeed, speed is crucial. You shouldn't be too fast, but you shouldn't be too slow. If you're too slow, it's clear you will miss the climate objectives. If you're too fast, you can do other mistakes. And we could see this again on the solar transition in some countries. In Europe, we did have solar panel productions. We were actually very good in the vanguard. But this transition came so fast that the European producers didn't have the capacity. We opened to China, and the whole market was destroyed. And that was, so for the government, I would say it's important to keep the three priorities at the equal footing and to see that they have the right pace. You have to have a certain ambition. It's a very ambitious target, but also you shouldn't go faster than the music, so to say, faster than the economy can produce. And I think the solar panel is something very interesting. If they had been a little bit more patient, they would have squared both the solar technology and the European production.
Okay, we have 10 more minutes and I have 3 questions in the audience. I think if we take them sort of all at the same time and then you have 3 questions so we can manage the 10 minutes. Please.
Yes, Helena Axelsson, Jernkontoret, Swedish steel industry. Thank you for a very excellent presentation and very balanced. I'm happy that you are really pushing the long-term aspect because this is important, of course, for the companies, for the real economy. I'm a bit worried about the development of the taxonomy. You have it in the box about long-term orientation, but what we see now with the proposals is rather not very long-term. It's of course difficult, and I believe that the problem is that the proposals are a bit simplifying the real world and not very forward-looking, rather looking what is green actually now. And it might be also connected to your risks about over-regulation. And this is a bit worrying because we really need this long-term view and that this financial sector gets the knowledge and is able to understand the ambitions of the companies, and the taxonomy as it is proposed does not really help.
Thank you. Please.
I think I could follow up on that. I'm Andreas Hagnell. I'm with the Swedish Association of Local Authorities and Regions and also involved in green bonds. And I see the same problems of over-regulation in the taxonomy. When we have sort of, especially when we have specific Swedish solutions, we have waste to energy of waste that no one wants. We have bioenergy that we consider as sustainable, if you can guarantee it to be sustainable. Not maybe all bioenergy is sustainable. We follow up on what buildings perform and not just make regulations on what they should perform. And that makes us more cautious in what buildings actually can perform, since they seldom live up to what they promise. And these are all some Swedish specifics that makes us concerned with the sort of over-regulation on how things actually work and what is actually sustainable. You mentioned also that, I mean, what technology is sustainable today is we're not sure will be sustainable next time, since nothing is really zero CO2. So those are, I follow up with some of those concerns. Thanks.
Thank you. So my name is Karin Apelman. I'm over here. I'm heading the sustainability team at EKN. So that's the Swedish Export Credit Agency. I first want to challenge you a little bit on that all banks closed on coal, because what we see and what our colleagues see is in the export credit world is that there are many banks who may have closed their investments on coal companies. But in terms of financing short transaction on the credit side, they're very much open on still financing a lot of coal equipment. But that's just an observation on the sort of where we want to move away from. I think you raised a really interesting point around, and I think it follows up on my colleague behind me, and that's something that we are now struggling with, where we want to go, is really on how we assess whether a project or a company are really in this transition. And I think your example of the utility company is really interesting, because that's where we want to be. That's where the real change is going to happen. So I'm wondering if you have any pointers on being able to assess that, or any ideas on how we can assess that at either a project level or a company level globally. Thank you.
Thank you. I've seen some more questions, but we are running out of time, so we'll have to make more seminars on sustainability. Please, these last 3 questions.
I'll be quick. On the steel, I'm very happy that you raise your voice. You know, we tried to solicit Euro business and it was very difficult. We saw a big hesitation to get engaged. And then we met them, and I think it's very important that you raise your voice exactly with these concerns. And that, I think the message is, you're right to say, but you know, the substitution of imports may not be the best solution. That you can say that change is happening within the companies towards better production technology, and also say maybe we need even to strengthen local production rather than this global production. So I think if you see, the Commission got, I think, 300 feedbacks on the taxonomy. The bulk did come from all NGOs and so on, and very few from the real business community. And I think it's very, very important that the real business community raises its voice, because you are presenting the jobs, you are presenting probably the most efficient production technology. I have a friend who said that we put on stream one of the most efficient coal plants in Europe, perhaps in the world, and I don't know how long I can operate that. And so he's raising his voice to say, you know, we have a very efficient production that's very environmental friendly, and trying to make people aware that this may be the better choice than going external. On the local authorities, I think indeed it's important to stress the idea of diversity. When you sit in Brussels, diversity is not the name of the game, but we have to find ways to put into that. Europe thrives on diversity, we see that, so I can only encourage you to do that. And also to think maybe about the procurement rules. When I talk to business people, they say the procurement rules are absolutely devastating from a sustainability aspect, that they have to do local. And I was in Germany, I talked to mayors of a town, even Tucholsky wouldn't know because it's so small, and they said I have to do the lighting for 12 million worldwide, and I have to take the cheapest offer, which was from far away. I now have to prove that the production was in line, and so on and so forth. So the idea is maybe we have to produce much more locally, go for much more diversification, and say, look, we have a local solution that works. And on the coal issue, I think the issue is a bit what Mats said on the owners. You have to look on a case by case, the diversification within companies. Having worked in France, there are many companies, take Total as an example, which we think is an oil production, but no, they're heavily diversifying, all the utilities are. And indeed, this would take us as a big investor to say there's absolutely no reason to divest from. And we should stay engaged. So that's also the data point. We have to look case by case. We are in a market economy, and the initiatives are very different, and we should not, we should foster the right transition, and that can happen within all types of companies.
Thank you very much. We have run out of time. We all have work to go to, so we are religious about ending on time. Christian Thimann, thank you very much for coming. Thank you for a great speech. Karin, Magnus, and Mats, thank you for an audience and all the questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.